Hi students, welcome to lesson number 11 on changing rural family, its structure and functions. Now the introduction. Families have both structure and function. Like the skeleton and muscles in a body, the structure is what gives a family its size and shape. Also, like organs within the body that performs necessary functions to keep the body working, there are certain necessary functions that keep families healthy. It sees society as a complex system whose parts work together to promote solidarity and stability. It asserts that our lives are guided by social structures, which are relatively stable patterns of social behavior. Social structures give shape to our lives. For example, in families, the community and through religious organizations and certain rituals or complex religious ceremonies give structure to our everyday lives. Each social structure has social functions or consequences for the operation of society as a whole. It consists of social relationships as well as any social institutions within a society. Social structure is a social class, that is upper class, middle class and poor. Social structure is the different levels of government. Family, religion, law, economy and class are all social structures. India has a rich family structure with a patrilineal background which help the family members to sustain a life with kinship groupings. Earlier, mostly joint families were found where family members lived together under one roof. They all mutually work, eat, worship and cooperate each other in one or the other way. This also helps the family to get strong mentally, physically and economically. The children also get to know about the values and traditions of the society from their grandparents and elders. The family system has given a lot of importance in India and has worked more often to make the bonding among families stronger. The family system has given a lot of importance in India and has worked more often to make the bonding among families stronger. Meanwhile, urbanization and westernization had its influence on the basic structure of the Indian family structure. The division of the joint family into smaller units is not the symbol of people rejecting this traditional structure. The circumstances and conditions also made the need for people to split the family. Family is a basic unit of almost all societies. It is especially true in India, where the very identity of a person is dependent on the status and position of his or her family and its social status. Now, the objectives of the lesson. The concept of rural family. What are the factors responsible for the changes in the rural family? What are the changes found in the rural family system? And the impact of the breakdown of joint family. Now, what is the family in rural India? The concept of rural families is at best a slippery one. This is because both aspects, family and rural, are today continuously being redefined. Further, in taking an international perspective, how family is defined varies regionally and from nation to nation. How family and rurality differs depending on the theoretical context as well. For example, feminist thinkers have reconstructed what constitutes a family and what rural work for women involves. Even the US Census Bureau had to rethink its 1990 definition of family. That is, a domestic group of two or more people united by bonds of blood, adoption or marriage. In the 2000 census, families were allowed much more freedom to self-define. Even the overall designation of households and families changed to families and living arrangements. Janet Buckmeyer, president of the Rural Sociology Society, says of families that families live together, share economic resources, act as cooperative, caring social units and provide environment for the emotional, social and economic well-being of family members. She goes on to talk about how families share a space, the home or domicile or a unit of co-residence. This allows for the wide variety of new forms of families which range from single parent households including fathers as primary caregivers, cohabitating families, blended families, gay and lesbian families, foster families and traditional nuclear and extended families. Whichever definition is used to describe rural families, it becomes clear that the rural family that was defined in the mid 20th century, the intact, large, hardworking, dirty smush, patriarchal farm family, if it exists at all today, is only one of a diverse and rich variety of families that live in rural regions of all countries. The factors that seem to define families in most nations are economic, social and emotional support among several individuals who live together in a household or even a tribal village. So, before talking about the rural family, let us talk about what is rurality. Any discussion of rural families requires first a definition of rural and some debate about the difference between rural versus urban lifestyles. Most discussions of rural population define rural settings as encompassing those people living in places with fewer than 2,500 residents or what has been called open countryside. In contrast, urban areas are defined as places that are composed of 2,500 or more residents in a region of at least 50,000 residents. A simple explanation of a rural urban contrast does not fully define rurality or begin to demonstrate the various family lifestyles between the two. According to O. William Farley and his colleagues, rural families have over time continued to function in a predominantly conservative style. These families participate in many religious and educational activities. The family often uses farmland for much of its income and resources. The nuclear family with traditional parental roles continues to exist. These families tend to spend more quality time together. However, many families in rural areas often conceal their needs and advantages, which in turn does not allow their strengths to be fully known. Said differently, rural and urban areas or the families that live in these respective areas can no longer be characterized by definitions that use population density as the standard. Rather, the lifestyles and economic conditions of these families should be emphasized. No one universally accepted definition of rural area exists. There is a great variance among rural communities and poverty in rural areas which tend to be long standing and generational. Family is one of the most important social institutions which constitutes the rural society. It caters to needs and performs functions which are essential for the continuity, integration and change in the social system, such as reproduction, production and socialization. Broadly speaking, there are two types of family. One is nuclear family, which consists of husband, wife and unmarried children, and second, it is joint or extended family comprising a few more kids than the nuclear type. Important dimensions of jointness of family are co-residentiality, commensality, corpuscinary generation and fulfillment of obligation towards kin and sentimental aspect. Co-residentiality means that members of a family live under the same roof. Commensality implies that they eat together, that is, have a common kitchen. Corpuscinary means that they might have joint ownership of property. Further, generation depth encompasses 3 generations or more, that is, grandfather, father and the son or more. Members of the family also have obligations towards their kin. Moreover, they have a sentimental attachment to the ideal of joint family. Rural family work as a unit of economic, cultural, religious and political activities. Collectivity of the family is emphasized in social life and feelings of individualism and personal freedom are very limited. Marriage is considered an interfamilial matter rather than an interpersonal affair. It is governed by rules of kinship. Scholars have identified the joint family as typical of rural India. These families are exposed to various forces, namely land reforms, education, mass media, new technology, new development strategies, urbanization, industrialization, modernization and so on. These mentioned forces are found to exercise tremendous influence on the contemporary family system in rural India. Now, let us examine these forces. The Gemeinschaft concept, a community or society characterized by relationship of sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies, has traditionally been used to describe the small town, a community rooted in a sense of mutuality, that is, efforts of 2 or more people to act together in ultimate harmony to achieve benefits for each other, common destiny and the resulting common bonds and obligations. Personal relationships are more informal and relaxed. The advantages of rural life for families have sprung from this Gemeinschaft view, that is, the interdependence and mutuality among extended family, clan or tribal members, the harmony with nature, the link with friendship and neighboring networks, the strengths provided by rural places of worship and the intrinsic satisfaction of working on the land and seeing an end product, the harvest of one's labor. A new positive factors that now attracts young families to rural communities, the relative safety of rural schools and playgrounds as compared to urban institutions and parks. Disadvantages for rural families have been viewed primarily as the lacks, that is, lack of social and cultural opportunities, of high paying jobs, of qualified teachers, of a larger world view, of an adequate health care and social services. Now, we will try to understand what are the various factors responsible for the changes in the rural family. There are various factors affecting the family structure in rural India, and they are: the first one, land reforms. Earlier, the members of the joint family normally lived together due to common ancestral property which was vast in size. Land reforms imposed ceiling restriction on the land holdings. In many cases, the heads of the family resorted to theoretical partition of the family by dividing the land among the sons in order to avoid the law of land ceiling. During their lifetime, the sons lived under his tutelage. If he was powerful, otherwise, sons gradually began to live separately during their parents' lifetime. Thus, the theoretical partition hastens formal partition and shows the seeds for separate living. Again, in many cases, real partition has taken place in the joint family immediately after the implementation of the land ceiling laws. Second factor is education and employment. Education, industrialization and urbanization have opened the scope for gainful employment to the villagers outside the village. Initially, a few members of the joint family moved to the city for education. After successful completion of education, most of them joined service or opt for other avenues of employment in the urban areas. They get married and start living with their wives and children. Gradually, such separate units become the nuclear families. However, the members of these nuclear units keep on cooperating with the other members for their natal family on most occasions. Other factor is economic difficulties in rural areas. The rural development strategies in India aim to eradicate poverty and unemployment, which further enhance a higher standard of life and economic development with social justice to the rural people. However, in reality, these have generated regional imbalances, sharpened class inequality, and have adversely economic and social life of the lower strata of the rural people. In the backward areas, people face enormous hardship to earn a livelihood. Hence, people of these areas are pushed to migrate to the urban areas. This migration has affected the family structure. Initially, men alone migrate, then they bring their family and gradually become residentially separated from their natal home. Another important factor is the growing individuals. A high sense of individualism is also growing among sections of the villagers. Penetration of the mass media, namely the newspaper, the TV, the radio, formal education, consumerist culture and market forces have helped individualism grow at a faster rate than ever. The rural people and the members of the rural joint family have started believing more in their individuality. In the past, the size of the family was relatively big. The kinship network was large and obligations were more. It was imperative that relatives were given shelter. Today, every individual strives to improve his or her standard of living and enhance his or her status in the community outside the purview of the family and the kin group. This is possible if the individual has lesser commitments and fewer obligations. This situation grows at a faster rate immediately after the marriage of the sons and coming of the daughter-in-laws. Many times, value conflicts between an educated individualistic daughter-in-law and old mother-in-law lead to the breakdown in the joint family system. What are the changes found in the rural family system? Due to industrialization and urbanization, the rural family system has undergone profound changes, and the major changes are: the first one, nuclear family ideal has attracted the rural folk. As a result, the joint family system prevailing in the village has been on the decline. Secondly, the head of the family enjoyed absolute authority in the family affairs. His words were taken as supreme and absolute. But today, the situation is altogether different. His importance in the family has become minimum. He is often ignored or neglected. Another change is that agriculture still constitutes a major occupation adopted by a sizable section of the ruralities. Nevertheless, Some ruralities migrate from the rural areas to the urban areas in search of employment. They sell their agricultural land to start business, something which was not thought of earlier. This has led to the disintegration of the joint family system in the rural areas. In the past, the position of rural women was marginal. They had to work from dawn to dusk. Their main activities centered around domestic chores and assisting the male folk in the field. But at present, they are availing educational facilities, and as a result, their social status has been improving. Now they have a say in all important family matters. They are no longer known as housewives, but as homemakers. Another important change, that is that religion had a strong grip on the rural family in the past. Village priest was very much honored. People did not hesitate to spend even beyond their capacity to appease gods and goddesses. They attached importance to ritualistic practices, but consequent upon the spread of education and modernization, the ruralities, especially the youth, accept only those religious elements which stand the test of reason and reject several irrational religious practices, including some ritualistic activities. Sixth one, simplicity was a hallmark of the rural family system, and the influence of urbanism has made the ruralities somewhat complex. They are not as simple-minded as they used to be earlier. Seventh, the disintegration of joint family system in the village has resulted in alienation and selfishness. Ruralities have become self-centered. They lack cooperation, generosity, sacrifice and tolerance. There exists a unitary family system in the village which has changed the attitude of the villagers. They have become more materialistic. Acquisition of riches and fascination for luxury have been given priority. Another major change is the economic function of the rural family system have undergone radical changes. In the past, the rural family was the center of both consumption and production, but today it has become a consumption unit only. Employment opportunities outside the family have freed young adults from direct dependence upon their families. And the last is the traditional rural family is known for its discipline, but in recent times, a number of factors such as individualism, democracy, equality of sex, etc., have weakened the traditional family values and norms. These are some of the changes observable in the rural family system. What is the impact of the breakdown of the joint family in rural areas? The transition in the rural family structure has certain significant impacts on the status and role of the family members. One impact is that of the diminishing authority of the patriarch of the joint family. In a joint family, traditionally, authority rests on the eldest male member of the family. Once the family splits into several units, new authority centers emerge there, with the respective eldest male member as the head of each nuclear unit. Authority is also challenged frequently by the educated and the individualistic young generations. Young men exposed to modern ideas of freedom and individualism show resentment to the traditional authority. After the split in a joint family, women who earlier had no say in the family affairs also emerges as mistresses of the nuclear households with enormous responsibility. In this process of transition, the oldest women also tend to lose their authority. Many of young women also challenge the dominating attitudes of the mother-in-law. Similarly, many of the traditional mother-in-laws also face an uneasy situation due to growing disproportionate individualism among the daughter-in-laws. With the breakdown of the joint family system, the aged, widow, widower and other dependents in the family face severe problems. The joint family system provides security to these people, but after the breakdown of this family system, they are left to themselves. In the rural area, the daycare centers for the old or the children's homes for the orphan are not available. Hence, their position becomes very critical. Many widows, widowers, children and even old couple become beggars. Many leave for old people centers around pilgrim centers as a last resort of their social security and mental peace. To sum up, Families the world over have undergone rapid changes in their structure, functions and responsibilities during the last 2 decades and is also applicable to rural families where predominantly traditional value systems with patriarchal customs and beliefs prevailed. Some of the major causes for change are universal: poverty, privatization, promotion of open market economies, advances in technology and science, effects of advances in health and epidemiological transition, changes caused by demographic transition, modernization and industrialization, urbanization, globalization are common trends affecting families. Internal and international migration, armed conflicts and the global pandemic have contributed to changes in value systems affecting families in rural India. The family has acclaimed universal importance and acceptance as a basic unit of society. It has been attributed with biological functions such as reproduction, social functions pertaining to nurturing and socialization of children, caring and support for older persons, the sick and those with disabilities. It is an institution responsible for maintaining and building relationships among family members as well as with the community. Some of the community functions rendered by a family are helping the family members and those outside the immediate family circles in many instances by becoming members of community-based organization. Inculcation of values and spiritual development performed by the family is essential for the sustainability of the society fulfilled through socialization. Providing bread and butter to its member, that is, provision of a regular supply of food, is the most important economic function of a family. A well-functioning family is an asset to the society, while the malfunctioning family is a burden. Therefore, it is the obligation and the duty of the society to strengthen and maintain families for their optimal functioning. The institution of the family in rural India is still strong in its fulfillment of functions and obligations.